And we're live again. And Robert, we're live. So,
Here we
all
go.
right. Well, we're broadcasting live one more time. This is welcome to one more episode of DojoLive, connecting experts like you. And we're broadcasting from our beautiful Mexico City offices here at Nearsoft. And today is a special day because we're going to have an equally special guest, Mr. Robert Lee. Robert is a career entrepreneur, and he calls himself a startup addict, just like a lot of us. And he's currently involved in a stealth relaunch project. But previously, Robert was the founder and CEO of UTM Systems Corporation. UTM was the first company to successfully enable online PIN-based debt transactions within the U.S. debit networks. Robert, welcome to our show today, and we're live. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, Carlos. It's a real honor to be with you folks, and this is amazing. Here I am in Seattle, and here you are down in Mexico. This is technology.
Yeah, this is technology indeed. However, our audience is from all over the place, right? So we have people in the U.S. and Mexico and Latin America. So we never know where we're going to be getting some rave reviews or hate mail. We never know. All right. So Robert, I understand that today you're going to be talking to us. Your chosen topic for today is, I kind of relate to that because I'm about to hit 50 myself, and this is about age and experience in Silicon Valley and beyond.
Yes.
So what I'd like to ask you, Robert, now is, initially, why did you choose this particular topic? Let's start with that, okay? Robert.
Sure.
The mic's all yours.
Well, we've been going through some fundraising here locally in the Seattle area and having some difficulty over 6-7 months. And suddenly one day I woke up and realized, wait a minute, Seattle's not a hardware town, for one thing. So we have to go out of town. So we basically ended up, I reached out to some friends of mine, and one of my buddies down in California said, I've got some contacts here. And within the last month or two, suddenly, angel investors started coming in, and it was because they understood hardware better. But more to the point I wanted to get to, and that's why I brought that topic up, is that over the years, and I've been, fundraising for 35 years for my own projects, starting back in the 80s. Being Asian has always been at many junctures a subliminal stumbling block. I have to say this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but going into a lot of the venture capital firms here in Seattle, the majority of them are white men. And so because of this, I can certainly empathize with women as well in technology, the stumbling blocks they have to go through in order to get funding, in order to get hired, get into jobs. Being another race, being Asian, and in this office space that I'm in now, we have people that are East Indian, and we've shared a lot of stories. We're very similar. We run into those same walls, visible, but when you walk into most of the venture capital firms in Seattle, the majority of them are white males that have all gone to Stanford, Harvard, or Yale, and they all belong to the same. So if you didn't go to the same fraternity or the same school, you don't have the same look as they do, that's a problem, or at least subconsciously for them. And then being Asian as well, another race can also be a problem, but then, age can definitely be a problem. I would hate to think of this, Carlos, if I were to walk into a tech startup today and say, I want to come in and up your job of being your vice president of marketing. The first thing they do is look, you're too old. And that's definitely a problem because I've got 50 years of scars and battle wounds to be able to show that I've had good and bad stuff happen. I've got a lot of experience, and knowing a lot of the time where all the problems can be and what you can overcome is really a good help to any startup, whether it's yours or someone else's. And as a result, that's why I do a lot of mentoring locally to young startups, because they've not gone through a lot of things we've gone through.
Sorry, I was on mute, and I always put myself on mute when I'm okay.
There we go.
Well, that was a great start, and there are a lot of things that are popping into my head regarding your journey through the technology world, the technology entrepreneurial world. And in going back a little bit, I'd like to ask you, it's sort of like an automatic question, is as because of your numerous accomplishments, um, and you have seen a lot through the course of 30 or 40 years, as you have mentioned. So regarding the trends and the challenges encountered in technology entrepreneurship, how different is it between now and its early years, like 30 years ago? What would can you number two, three major challenges that you have encountered as with the passing of time in order to become a successful entrepreneur in technology?
Yes. Well, certainly some things are a lot faster, no doubt about that. We have broad bandwidth, we've got email, all those good things. They have even 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, when I launched my first tech startup back in 1983.
Mm-hmm.
I developed the first color digital scanners for PCs. We didn't have email. We didn't have AOL and all the other stuff coming up. It was just being talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I still remember, part of what I learned about scanners. This is all because of good luck, being immersed in things. I learned to be an artist when I was a very young age. And eventually I became a graphic designer and a commercial artist and an ad agency person. And because of that, I did consulting work with Xerox. And through Xerox, I learned all about photocopiers and how the mechanics of photocopiers worked. And that's what gave me background on scanning. And so in 1983, when I was in Florida, we ran into a problem. I was working on the board of directors of a museum, and they were trying to figure out, how do we take pictures and turn them into large wallpaper? And I thought, gee, it'd be nice if you could take pictures and scan them. We've now got PCs. The IBM PC had come out in 1980, and in 83, the 286, the 8286, the IBM PC AT.
I remember that.
Yes, that's way back. And a lot of kids won't remember that. But of course, I thought, what if we could invent a machine that could literally take pictures like a color copier and just scan one page at a time and digitize it with pixels and bits and put it up on a screen and store it digitally. So that's how the concept started. And I put the concept down on paper and did some research, basic research, and said, yeah, it should be doable. And so I ended up hooking up with a local investment banker. And he basically had other people in other parts of the country, a guy up in Illinois, who said, I've got investors across the Midwest. And I can bring some of those investors. They're all accredited. We can bring them. I had no idea back then. This is in the 80s. And Reg D was just beginning. Reg D was, private placements, being able to raise money from accredited investors, people who made over $250,000 a year or had $1 million net worth. I had no idea, didn't know any of that stuff. Well, the securities guy sent me over to Fort Lauderdale, where I met a securities lawyer. And we spent about a week and a half talking about this stuff and literally putting together a private placement memorandum. And I remember the first day or two, we got into some incredible debates and discussions because he started putting together the risk factors. And the risk factors are that, you could lose your money, Mr. Lee could drop dead, the invention might not work. And I got angry because I said, we can't put that in there. We're going to scare investors away. And he had to convince me and say, no, we have to put that in because those, number one, it's the regulations. Number two, it's full disclosure. But he goes, number three, most people never read that stuff anyway. They either believe in you and the product or they don't. So anyway, eventually we did put the private placement memorandum together. It's like a 40, 50-page document that we could send out to people. And in 1983, you have to understand, like I said, there was no email, no internet. Fax was just becoming really popular. So we thought, what are we going to do to get this out to people? We've got all these investors up in Illinois, Minnesota, Wisconsin. And Carlos, the VHS videotape machine, the last ones, they're going to be manufacturing at the end of this month. And there's not going to be any more VHS videotape machines. Back in 82, 83, VHS was just starting to come out. People were being able to record things. So what did we do? We went into a local TV station, news network. We hired the news announcer and we rented their studio with the tables, chairs, and a couch and everything else. And we wrote a script. And so I sat down with the guy, and he ended up doing an interview on TV, and said, "Hello, I'm so-and-so, and I'm here to interview Mr. Robert Lee. He's from a company called Spectrafax. And Mr. Lee has invented something for PCs, personal computers, called a scanner." So we had to go through a minute or so explaining what a PC was and what a scanner was. And we put it all on tape. And this videotape, we edited down to about, I think it was about 15 minutes, a 15, 20-minute interview. And once it was finished and cleaned up, then we made duplicates of the VHS tape, and we sent 30 of those tapes across the Midwest to people. And those potential investors put the tape inside their videotape machine, watched the interview, and within 2 months, we raised close to $1 million. We were funded. If you look at that and compare it to today, doing a crowdfunding campaign, there's really no difference, except that you would make a 3-minute video, you would post it up on YouTube, you would embed it into your crowdfunding page, and then you would launch and tell people, hey, we're raising money, here's the explanation, here's what's... So in many ways, we did the same thing over 30 years ago, except we used different technology at the time. And today, you're doing the same thing, except your reach is much broader, it's faster, but you're still using video to explain stuff to people. And as I say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The principles and the concepts don't change at all. And that's
kind of an intriguing concept, and actually that was like the second item that I was going to bring up is when you sent me the information that was going to be shared today, was that particular phrase pulled my attention immediately. The more things change, the more things stay the same. So I'm trying to figure out how to frame it in the technology world. So it would be great if you could elaborate a little bit on why you say this.
Well, this is the other saying that goes along with that is there's nothing new under the sun. And when you look all the way back to Da Vinci and people like that, their inventions were basically based on things that already existed, except they took them and changed them and adapted them to modern times, to the times at that space and time. What I tend to do as an inventor, and I've talked to other inventors, is you look at a problem and then you take what's available and then you mold it and you turn it into a concept and an idea that will solve the problem, the solution. And so what you're doing is you're taking existing stuff, something that is already there, and then you're using it to improve something that needs solving. And that's the core of invention. And Edison did the same thing, Tesla did the same thing, Elon Musk does the same thing. One of the things I've joked with some fellow inventors is that we're perverts. You basically take things and you pervert it. You take it, you twist it. And there are many things that you can actually change too much. And it's such a quantum leap that it comes down to adoption. How quick can you get people to adopt it, and how many people can you get to adopt it? And of course, there's the Malcolm Gladwell book, The Tipping Point. Talking about how you have the very early adopters, 10%, and of course the crazy geeks just love something, and of course they all adopt it. But the next stage is to get the other 70 or 80%, the middle adopters, the broad base. How do you get them to adopt it, use something? And then the last 10 or 15% are the stragglers, the old timers, the people that are the seniors, the people that are reluctant to change, that are very, but once they see something and they've used it a few times, then at least they start using it. That's when you've got full adoption of a new idea. But if you can't get the middle people, the broad range in the middle to adopt something, then something's not going to catch on. And that's why, I look at a lot of the new tech ideas that come out. Sometimes you have to scratch your head, go, I don't think that's going to go. Initially, an idea might sound fantastic, but if you can only get 10% of the early adopters to use it, and then the other 80, 90% going, no, I'm not interested, it's not that exciting, or it's too complicated, then they're not going to adopt it. Your product's not going to launch properly. It won't go. And so it's very important to look at how easy to use. I believe a lot in user interface, ease of use. All those key issues are very important, whether it's a hardware product or a software product. And if you don't think so, you need to look back on history again, look at things that failed, look at things that succeeded and why. And it really comes down to adoption. How easy is something to adopt? And you guys are in the software development business, same thing. If you put a difficult user interface in something, nobody's going to try it. They're not even going to try it. Not worth it. It's got to be it's got to pull someone in with as few steps as possible. simplicity is the rule.
Yeah.
So
Simplicity. You nailed it right when you say simplicity is the rule. Less is more. So yeah, I'm with you all the way. There's something, if I may, I'd like to go back to the name of today's talk, which is specifically age and experience in Silicon Valley. Age and experience, I cannot separate in my mind the aging factor, right? So it's not about just age of one particular person or at a particular moment in time, but about the process of aging in Silicon Valley. I mean, when you go and you spend X amount of years in the same industry in the technology world, and with the passing of time, there comes aging. I mean, physical aging, right?
yes.
So, in that sense, well, there's a funny take on this. If you had to come up with a term to refer to that group of people who's aging with the passing of time. For example, in the 80s and the 90s, they use the terms like young urban professionals, like yuppies, or whatever which I'm gonna call it. So you had to, if you had to come up with a term, which one would it be? And there's a reason why I'm asking this, and I'll tell you in a minute. But think of a name that you would like to use to aging professionals in Silicon Valley. Which one? How would you refer to them?
The term millennial still keeps coming up.
Okay.
And that's used a lot. It's probably overused these days, but we talk a lot about millennials and their expectations, how they do things or what they expect handed to them.
Mm-hmm.
That I look at that as very broad base.
Yeah.
A lot of millennials.
Okay.
Nothing else matters. I'm important.
Okay. Well, the reason why I brought it up, and let me tell you, is that about the aging in Silicon Valley. I mentioned to you that we had a piece written by our company's CEO, Matt Perez. He wrote specifically a post called "Aging in Silicon Valley," and what he says, he was trying to come up with this funny name. He says, "I mean, what we're going to call ourselves, Guppy Muppy?" Like he said, Guppy might work, and I'm quoting him. He says, "Geriatric urban professionals," right? In a funny way. So, and what he says, and he says, we're not really in the geriatric stage. We're playful and joking with the words here. But he says, and this is the relevant part, we've always been at the leading edge of things, and one step ahead of the game.
Yeah.
I think that's the key element of this conversation is with aging, with the passing of time. As much as aging might be looked or frowned upon in Silicon Valley or in the technology world, however, then we're on the leading edge of things, right? We are one step ahead of the game. So why not with a label that can stand the test of time, right?
I agree. And it's just, if you really look at it, it's kind of hypocritical when you think of the Valley, because they talk about us, we're outliers. We're the guys way out there who think ahead of the pack, and we think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
But if you start preaching that to everybody and telling everybody think outside the box, well, wait a minute, maybe you should be thinking outside the box and think about people who are older who actually have more experience than you do, but they don't. So you're actually catching them on a catch-22, because on one hand you tell everyone to be open-minded, think outside the box, but then on the other side it's like, oh no, we can't let old people in here, they're too old. Well, which is it? Are you, and I guess, I don't know, I think the term for us older guys, I like outliers, to be honest with you, but that might be too broad. Might be too broad, but it's just, you either are an outlier and I like that because it also means you're an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fit in any one box, and that's, I see nothing wrong with that. That's actually a good thing.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Robert.
And by the way, that's why I emphasize lifelong entrepreneur. Instead of calling myself a serial entrepreneur. Somehow I just don't like the term serial, because I think it's being associated with serial killers.
Yeah. There's this Charles Manson type of feeling to it, right? Okay. There's another thing that I'd like to ask you. First of all, let me stop right there, because I'd like to remind the audience that they can send us your question. Please send us your question. It's very easy. Just go to our website on the player. There's a chat right there. Just type your question, send it over, and we'll read them read it off to Robert so he can respond. Um, Now, as far as let me going back to the topic of aging, and there's this. I have personally seen this scenario, so I'll lay it here to you, and then you can tell me what your view is on this. At least here in Latin America and Mexico, this is something very common. As we age, we're 40, 45, 50, 55. There's always this complaining about, oh, we're getting old, we're not gonna get hired, or oh, there's the recruiters look down on me because I'm getting old, and blah 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 blah. So I hear this all the time, all over the place in forums, groups, professional groups on LinkedIn and the like. So every time I read those arguments, I try to step in and leave some kind of contribution, and I always say, okay, guys, yeah, let's face it, we're getting old. I mean, we're aging, right? So we cannot avoid that. But however, there is this tendency to remain on that rigid mindset of, oh, I need to be employed. I need a job. Oh, I'm going to starve if I don't get a job because I'm 50. So what would you say to this group of people on either side of the border, the US or here, that are too rigid in their mindset, in their paradigms? They're like, it's hard for them to change them, and they're stuck on this "I gotta get a job" mindset because they're 50 and they're
Yes.
struggling with it. How would you say to them? What would you say to them to
Well,
encourage them?
yeah, one of the things I definitely encourage is entrepreneurship. With as much knowledge as people I run into, as they get older,
Hmm.
leveraging all of that into something like a business or consulting, to share with other people, actually has value. Unfortunately, too many people don't think of that as value. Many people my age tend to look back and go, "Oh yeah, you're right. I'm too old. I don't have." But if you sit down and make a list of what is it that I know, what is it that I've learned in life, all of a sudden you might surprise yourself as to how much you actually have and what you might be able to contribute to either a new business or to something else, to a new project. Um, I guess over the years, you realize different people have different attitudes. And yes, I do understand, when you hit your 50s and 60s, it's almost like they train you to think, oh, you're getting old. But let's face it, they've already started upping Social Security because people are living longer, they're working longer. Our lifespans are increasing. If anybody here, listens and reads Ray Kurzweil is talking about the next 10, 15, 20 years, things are going to be changing. We may end up living forever, or at least to be hundreds of years old. And in that case, number one, you want to keep your body and your brain optimal. You want to keep it in as good shape as possible. And in many ways, it's been a problem too. You see people that they hit their 50s go, oh, I'm old, so I don't want to go out and exercise anymore. I don't want to walk. And I think, not accepting that, learning to reject some of those things and saying, no, why would I want to believe that? You can believe anything you want. And, I still go out walking, running, exercising, doing different things, whatever it takes to stay active. I enjoy it. I read a lot. I interact with people. Those are things that some people I find as they get older, they stop doing that stuff. They start dropping that stuff off, thinking that they're getting older. Most people would probably surprise themselves if they push themselves a little bit. And I think, optimizing yourself, pushing and finding your limits is very, very important. I guess that's my advice to most people. Find where your edges are and go out for them. I will tell you, my team that's coming on board, most of them are actually in their 50s and 60s. Why? Because they're experienced. These are people that know what they're doing and they've been in their industries a long time. We need that. We value that. It's very important. And the other thing about it is their Rolodexes are bigger. They've known a lot of people across their lives. Very important.
So is that something that can be leveraged? I mean, when you have a huge
Absolutely.
Rolodex, so
That
that's
helps. That helps.
uh-huh. Okay.
I guess I believe a lot in serendipity, Carlos, because you run into people and 5 years later, they may turn out to be somebody very important in your life. You don't know. And so I like to think that I'm still staying very open-minded at this stage of my life to meeting new things, meeting new people, having new experiences and adventures, and looking on them all as an opportunity, because you never know where it's going to go. For example, I talked to you earlier before we went online about a car accident that I had 6 years ago. I had a severe concussion. I didn't know I got a concussion until 7 months after the accident. But for a couple of years before that, I had already started working with retired NFL football players. I have a blog, writing about football, taking on the NFL and everything else. And we had conferences in Las Vegas where we had people like Dr. Daniel Amen, Dr. Barry Sears, and people like that talking in front of football players about the brain, hyperbarics, all kinds of things. And had I not done that, and I never got paid for it. I did it just to help some friends. I met some football players and decided, hey, this is wrong. You guys are getting stiff, by the NFL. I'd like to help you guys. So because of that, we set up the blog. We got stuff going, and I learned a lot. I hate football. I don't even watch it. But because of that, I met a lot of people like the doctors, people like that. And when I had my brain concussion, I was fortunate enough to be able to fall back on those people and call them and say, hey, I'm forgetting stuff, or this is going on. And the doctors would question me and ask me, and one day, I think it was Dr. Amen, said, Robert, you've got a concussion. You've got to get into a neurologist right away. Well, by then, the insurance company was ready to cut me off after 7 months. They didn't want to pay for anything. So they weren't going to pay the $3,000 to pay for me going to a neurologist. And as things got worse and I progressed into, more almost like a dementia state, my short-term memory was gone, I started realizing how bad it was for a lot of other people who also had brain injuries. I didn't know this. I didn't know that insurance companies know a lot more than we realize. And so their goal is to make money, pay out as little as possible, keep as much money as possible. And more people keep coming to me as I join groups telling me, yeah, I didn't get paid much by the insurance company either. Yeah, I've got a concussion. It happened 10 years ago. Why, this is serendipity, I guess I'm talking about, Carlos. We were at one of the football conferences, and we were talking about concussions, and I just had my accident a few months earlier. And we're at the dinner table on a Saturday night banquet. We were closing off our conference, and Dr. Barry Sears, who's also into supplements and fish oils and everything else, he had his diet company, his own diet. Dr. Sears leans over to me, and this is Robert. He goes, the insurance companies have known for decades, because of all the actuarials that they have. They have actuaries. They got the largest base of actuaries working for them, working with numbers. And he said, they've known for years. How fast do you think you have to be going to get a serious concussion? And I looked at him and I said, well, maybe 25, 30 miles an hour. And Dr. Sears leaned over and he smiled at me and he goes, no. He goes, the insurance companies have known for years that it only takes 9-mile-an-hour collision to give you a serious concussion. Now, if the insurance companies had known all of this, why, then they knew that I got rear-ended by a truck doing 65 miles an hour, Carlos. Why did they send my car into a garage to have it looked at and to have it appraised? Why did the insurance company not immediately send me into a neurologist as well to get my brain checked? Because they didn't want to pay for it. And they're doing this to everyone. Here you got a police report that says you got hit by somebody doing 60 miles an hour, or that you hit somebody. They don't want to take care of it. So there's a lot of stuff like that that's hidden. And I guess I'm bringing it back to serendipity and contacts and network. You never know if you put yourself out there, you never know who you're going to run into. You never know what you're going to learn from people. And I guess that's what I've realized is contacts are important, networking's important, and you never know who you're going to run into. It's just the way life is. I've met, I jokingly tell people now, I've had 3, shall we say, arguments with Steve Jobs over my career. And
you mentioned that.
Yes,
so tell us about it. What happened?
Well, when I invented the first color scanner back in '83, and then we ended up raising the money, we developed it. And in 1984, I think it was, we were at Comdex in Las Vegas, one of the first Comdexes. And it was run by, I remember it was Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon Adelson, of course, owned Comdex and ran it. And we had it all set up. And one of the things that was very annoying back then in the early 80s in Comdex was we invented the color scanner because of strategy. I thought, look, we got to come up with a color scanner first because I guarantee you, we're not going to be the smartest first guys. The Japanese have been doing scanning and copiers for years, and they will probably come up with a black and white one. So let's come up with a color one, and it will be ahead of the market. And it worked. It was a good strategy. What happened though was that in the early '80s, you would set up your booth, and all the Japanese companies like Hitachi, Panasonic, and everything would send all their workers over with cameras, and they would take pictures of all your stuff. And you try to get them out of your booth and like, get out of here, get out of here. But that was part of their spying and their espionage. Well, anyway, I'm standing there in my suit with my staff in the booth, demonstrating the scanners that we had. And all of a sudden, a Japanese gentleman comes in, and he walks over to one of my vice presidents, and he says, "Who's in charge here?" And he spoke perfect English. And they said, "That's Robert over there. He's the CEO." The guy comes over and he goes, "Hi, my name is Guy Kawasaki. I'm from Apple." Didn't know who he was. Well, anyway, it turns out that it was '84, and we had to sign an NDA. We'd never even heard of an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. We had to sign a non-disclosure. And at that point, then they all of a sudden told us about this new machine called a Macintosh, the little tiny white red box with a 9-inch screen, black and white. And they said, we're going to bring out desktop publishing with the Laser Writer 1. So it's the first laser printer. And they said, you guys have a scanner. We really want to work with you guys and interface the color scanner to a Macintosh. So we ended up negotiating with Apple. And back in those days, in the '80s, you're in the software business, Carlos. So you would understand drivers and how hard they are even today. Well, back in the '80s, you can't even begin to imagine how difficult writing a driver was for us. A scanner, a brand new device, interfacing it with a PC, then we had to port it over to a Mac. And so we spent months working with a team out of Hawaii, creating the interface for my scanner to move it over to a Macintosh. We ended up getting it done. We made it work, and we created a software interface that worked with my color SpectraFax scanner. We got invited to Macworld Expo. I think it was '85 in Boston. I can't remember. I don't think it was called Macworld at the time. I think it was Apple World or something like that.
I think it was back in the Macintosh Plus state.
Yeah.
The little ones.
Yeah, exactly. And so we ended up, we got one corner of the gigantic Apple booth plus all the other vendors. And it was the night before the show was going to open. And my team and I made sure everything was set up right, everything worked. And it's like, whew, we got it done. And all of a sudden, in the back of the hall, this big door opens up. This guy comes marching out, and he's got 4 or 5 guys with him, an entourage. And he comes stomping through, walking around, looking at everything. And he comes over to the Apple booth. It's Steve Jobs. And looking the same as usual. And he walks to each of the corners and looks at all the different products and devices. That's cool. That's neat. Yeah. And he comes over to our corner. And he looks at the scanner. Goes, what's that? And it's like, hi, Steve. That's our color scanner. We just interfaced a color scanner with your Macintosh. Oh, give me a demo. So put a picture in the scanner, close the lid, scanned it. And back then, the Apple had, Windows. When Windows came out, they made a spinning hourglass. And when the Mac first came out, they had a wristwatch. Well, my programmers, the guys that we worked with, were so good, we actually put a second hand on the wristwatch that spun around. Apple hadn't even figured out how to do that. And so we, did the scan. This black and white picture of a color image shows up on the little tiny 9-inch Mac screen. Of course, I could tell they were impressed. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, even back then, Jobs was always very contentious. He always had to be the smartest guy in the room. So I looked at it, starts thinking, and he goes, wow, very impressive. He goes, well, how come it's not 32-bit? How come it's not so many color? How come it's not? It's like, wait a minute. We just spent 8 or 9 months of our time and money interfacing our scanner with your new Mac. And you're going to criticize this? And within a second or two, I was not happy. And then, in a second or two, I looked at it, I pointed at the little tiny black and white screen, and I said, well, Steve, when that monitor is bigger, and when that's 32-bit color, and that's 256 layers, my scanner will match it. All of a sudden, even back then, you could see the veins popping on his neck. He was getting PO'd. And then all of a sudden, he goes, ha, 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 ha. And his yes men all went, ha, 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 and they all walked away over to the next display. That was my first interaction with Steve Jobs. And the other two were similar. He always criticized everybody else's work, always. And that is why, in fact, even till the day he died, you really very rarely, if ever, in fact, I don't remember anyone ever getting credit for inventing something inside of Apple. It was always Steve Jobs getting in front of the stage, in front of an audience saying, look what I've done. I'm Steve Jobs. This is Apple. This is what I've got. It was always all about him. And now, living in Seattle, you got to understand it. We've got Bill Gates and people like this who've done Microsoft. And I remember in the 80s, when the PCs first came out and then the Macs, people vilified Bill Gates and they vilified Microsoft being so powerful and controlling. And they loved Steve Jobs and they loved Apple because, oh, they're so cool. Well, over time, people started realizing Bill Gates was a nice guy. And in fact, today, Bill Gates is the biggest philanthropist in the world, giving away all his money, and he's planning on giving it all away when he dies. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs dies. Did you hear anything about any donations or any charities, that large blocks that they gave of his estate to any of those? No, he gave the entire thing over to his wife, and then I think he gave $1 million to his illegitimate daughter that he didn't acknowledge for the whole time he was alive. That's it. That's all Steve Jobs did. And yet Bill Gates is here giving money out, helping children in Africa, doing all kinds of food experiments, diseases and stuff. And so you kind of look at the personalities and realize who the good guys really are. And that's more experience with people that I've run across in life.
Do you think that what's going on with you just told us about your view on the difference between what Steve Jobs did and what Bill Gates is doing as far as giving away a whole to charities and foundations? Do you think that has to do with the aging factor? I mean, he's a...
Well, both Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were the same age. And, Steve Jobs ended up going one way. It was always about him. And Bill Gates just continued being a nice guy, backed down from running his company, and put more focus with him and his wife on charity and helping the world, because you can only spend so much money. And one thing, we get back to this age thing. I do have to remind everybody in Silicon Valley, the guys at Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin. I want to remind everybody that they're in their 40s now. They're old, and yet they're still the leaders at Google. I want to remind everybody that even Facebook, what's his name from Facebook? He's hitting into his 40s already. He's getting old. He's no longer a 20-year-old. And so, they're all...
Zuckerberg?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg. They're all getting old. So now what are you going to do? Should you retire because you're senior? Of course they're not. Because they're going to tell you, oh, we still have good ideas. Well, if they still have good ideas, why don't you have older people in your company? I've been told that down in the valley, especially with Google offices, there's a fair amount of prejudice, against age. They really quietly try not to hire older members. And there's a lot of that in bulletin boards and everywhere else. That seems to be coming up a lot about Google. I'm surprised. I'm very surprised.
Okay. Robert, we're approaching the final quarter of the session, and there's something. There's something that I would like to ask you, and I would like you to please elaborate a little bit more on the beyond part of the talk. You mentioned age and experience in Silicon Valley and beyond. So what's beyond? What do you mean by beyond? What is expecting us in this regard?
Well,
what is awaiting us? I'm sorry, in this regard.
Yeah, we're kind of, I guess, talking about what I see as the future. I think we're going to see some massive changes in the next 5 to 10 years. It's amazing what we're able to watch. Look, here in Seattle, of course, just like in every other major city, you've already got a lot of the ride-share businesses, Uber and Lyft and everybody else. My daughter, for example, is just getting into joining a group where you could actually just jump in a car and drive it, use it for 30 miles, and then drop it off. Those are happening. Now all of a sudden you've got self-driving cars with Teslas and all the major big three companies. They're taking over. putting out self-driving cars. We're going to have self-driving trucks out there on the freeway. So we're going to see that literally in the next 5 to 10 years. It's not something that's going to be 20 years out. It's only going to accelerate faster and faster. We're seeing drones. We're seeing, the flying drones. Amazon's talking about using those for delivery. We're seeing, in fact, here, this group here, it's a place called Extra Slice. This is an incubator space. And one of the companies that's here is a company called RoboDub. They've created these robot cars and things that you can actually play in games and everything else. They're physical, they're real. And one of the things they've talked about as well is using those kinds of vehicle drones to do deliveries. What's happening is that now we're starting to see manual labor disappear, okay? We hear people talk a lot. Seattle is one of the forerunners about the $15 an hour wage. Okay, they've integrated that. But now what's happened is that you start seeing McDonald's and Burger King and companies putting in automated machines to be able to make food and to also collect your money. So you no longer need clerks. So certain kinds of jobs and tasks are being sidetracked. Once we have self-driving cars, we're going to end up with food delivery services. We're going to end up with all kinds of rides and stuff. We no longer need drivers. So certain kinds of jobs, physical types of jobs, are going away. And that's going to have a major impact on our entire society, okay? I guess that's one of the things I look at as both a problem and an opportunity. We are so far behind in our educational system today. It really is. We're still using very old techniques to teach our kids. And what are we going to do in 10, 15 years when these kids get out of college? We're not training them to be adaptable or to adapt to what the new stuff's going to be. And all of a sudden, the jobs that are available today, I would say a third to a half of them are going to be gone. Physical labor jobs are going to be gone. Menial tasks are going to be gone. You won't even be able to have a truck driver job, a cab driver job in 10 years. Those jobs will disappear. What are those people going to do? We have to be able to train both youth, young people going through the system today, and how do we address people that are today in their 30s, even, and 40s, who are going to be getting older in 5 to 10 years when all this stuff comes down and changes. How do you bring those people back into the workforce and change their training, their mentality? How do you get them to adapt to what's going to happen? I really do believe we're going into a whole different phase of society, work, industry in another 10 years, within 5, 10 years. It's going to be faster than we expect. And that's what I see as the future. The future is, we've got to readjust education. We've got to readapt our workforce. What are we going to do? I mean, even with China's success right now, the way China's going, it's not going to last much longer because of manufacturing now. They've got a huge labor force. It's all physical labor, people. They bring people in from the countryside, from the farms. They put them in the factories to work. Well, all of a sudden, in 5, 10 years, we're going to have robots, and we're going to have assembly lines with robots and machines. What are those people going to do? What are we going to do to train them? And I do think that, this is going to come down to, we've talked earlier about artificial intelligence, machines, virtual reality. How can we take that to the next step and advance it and also adapt it to what's going on today to get us ready for the future? I think it's going to be critical. That's where the future is going to go. It's good and it's bad. I'm glad that there's a lot of menial labor tasks that won't be necessary anymore. It's good. But on the other hand, a lot of those people need those jobs. What are we going to do for them? How are we going to change that?
Okay, yeah, so that's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, Robert, that there's a great emphasis being placed on youth, right, in the technology world, but yet you manage to remain an outlier in the startup community, right? So my question would be, is this something that you consider an advantage, or is there a way that it can somehow backfire? I mean, considering yourself an outlier.
Well, I guess considering myself an outlier, it's just the fact that I finally, at this age, am comfortable with accepting myself as being different. I guess that's, if anything, I pass on to my children and other people, is that it's okay to be different. More than anything else, accept it's all right. Think outside the box, be different. It's very important. For a long time when I was very, very young, I realized I was different just because of the way I looked and because of the way people looked at me. And it was very difficult. Even when I was successful, made money, had my own businesses, you still end up getting the look, the feel. And you know, in the last while, I finally realized this is who I am. This is what I've done. This is what I've accomplished, and I'm comfortable with it. And I'm comfortable with being who I am. And I think that's the best advice I can give anyone. You know, find out who you are, and do you need to improve things, and can you accept who you are and be comfortable with it? That's the most important for
Right.
our youth. Be comfortable. And if you're different, that's okay too. Figure out how to leverage that.
Be comfortable. Exactly. Robert, there's something else that I would like to ask you in closing, and this has to do with your how can I say this? With the way you've done things over the last 30 years, and based on that, based on your experience as a whole, I'd like to ask you if there's a specific stage in time in which building the right teams has become or has been more difficult or easier for that matter. Is there a specific circumstance or condition, market condition, or a technology condition or situation that is going to either make it harder or facilitate building the right team in order to come up with a great product? Okay,
That's a
so
very good question, Carlos. Um, well, I like to tell people that I've made and either spent or given away 3 small fortunes in my lifetime, and I've lost 2 big ones because of other people. One thing that I've learned is that you have to have people you can trust and surround yourself with people that are knowledgeable. I did tell you earlier that I never finished high school, and everything I've learned on my own. But one of the key secrets to building a successful business, particularly in the tech industry, always hire people smarter than you, always. And each of these people contribute to the project and to what it is you're doing, because number one, you cannot know everything. Impossible. There is no one that knows everything. The other is that each of these people bring different experiences to the table. And again, as we talked about, it's all about experience. And they can say, "Oh no, you might not want to do that because that's dangerous, or that's not going to work." And having that kind of advice short circuits and saves you a lot of time. That said, you know, my last company, when we had UTM, I will just state it openly. It was because of the thievery of 3 bad people inside my company. One was a person who was my CTO that I thought was one of my best friends. I'd known him 15, 20 years. His son even came down the street. I found him a job, helped him through his divorce. And his son would come down the street to eat dinner off my dinner table with my children when in fact he was stuck at work. Figured I trusted him, brought him out to Seattle to be my CTO. He's the one that spearheaded a bankruptcy lawsuit against my company. And it wasn't to try to take money. They tried to steal the intellectual property of my company. That was what the bankruptcy filing was for. They tried to steal my company. We beat them, but unfortunately, they filed everything Labor Day weekend of 2001, and the very next week, 9/11 happened. And so the market, as you know, the market collapsed, the dot-com crash and everything else. So we lost, my CFO and I personally lost a lot of money trying to salvage and save everything. We couldn't raise money, but we did get our IP back out of it. That helped. But I will tell you that no matter what, you do have to watch your back. You know, you can't not trust anyone, but at the same time, you know, you do also have to have a team where everybody watches and covers everybody's back. Trust, integrity is everything. You've got to have people you can fall back on. No, you can't do it all on yourself, and you can't trust everyone. You know, but you have to give everyone that first chance. That's very important.
Absolutely. Okay, Robert, we're about to wrap up today's broadcast. And finally, in closing, I'd like to ask you if there's any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with our audience, pretty much about anything that you consider worth sharing with the folks out there who are watching.
It's all about passion. It's all about enjoying yourself, enjoying what you're doing, and following your passion. It has nothing to do with money. If you're successful and passionate about what you do and the project and the product that you're launching is good, the money will follow. If you look at any of the successful startups and launches, that's always the way it works. If you pursue only the money, not going to happen. And so that's the best advice I give everyone in doing startups here in Seattle and everywhere else. Follow your passion. Enjoy
Excellent.
yourself. Have fun.
Have fun being the key word. If you're not having fun, then it's probably not the right fit for you. Or you're
Exactly.
right. So I totally agree with you. Since we all have fun, usually we're lucky that we usually have fun in this, especially in this industry where we always engage in fun things uh, and we have a blast. However, there's one little thing finally that I'd like to mention mm, is there do you think that there could be a moment or a situation in which passion, enthusiasm might, how can I say this? Let me rephrase my thoughts. Okay, in your experience, what do we have to watch for so that our passion and enthusiasm is not overpowered by reality, by the harsh reality that sometimes is permeates business endeavors?
Yes. Well, I guess that's the idea of surrounding yourself with people smarter than you are, and to have good mentors and advisors, because those are the people you can fall back on. And once in a while, they will tell you, "Hold on, you're out of line," and to be open-minded enough to listen to them and say, "Yeah, you're right," and get back on track. A lot of the time, we do let our passions overwhelm us, and what you don't want to do is be blinded, to reality as well. You gotta have your you gotta have your head in the clouds. You've also got to have your feet in the ground, and that's very important. And that's also why mentors and advisors are extremely important. Who you surround yourself with, not just the employees, but the people you follow for advice. It's
Right,
critical to your success, not just in business, but in life.
right. Mentors, advisors, consultants. Hey, again, it goes back to the beginning of the chat, of the talk is we're getting older. Hey, guys. Hey, younger guys. We're there for you if you need us.
Exactly.
There's a whole thing. We have our share of good things to share with you that you could probably use them to increase your odds of being successful, right? So,
Yes.
right, absolutely. Okay, Robert, I really want to thank you for having agreed to be here with us today. I know we've been going back and forth, but I think it was your participation can be key in enlightening a whole bunch of people out there who are aging and are also involved and engaged actively in the entrepreneurial world. So I want to thank you for having shared your experience, your wisdom with us today, and I look forward to more conversations like this in the near future. And thank you again,
Likewise.
Robert, from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you for
And
the opportunity. I'm really glad you invited me, Carlos.
absolutely, it was our pleasure. Okay, guys, thank you. This was just another episode of Dojo Live from Mexico City. Thank you all. You have a wonderful day. We'll be in touch.
Catch up. Thanks, Carlos.
Goodbye.